Greetings, traveler, and welcome to the meditation room. In this new type of episode, I will be taking a look at game concept files and game design documents sent in by other travelers and giving my feedback on the desired areas. So today we have one sent in by Denislav Petrov. He mentioned that this is a game concept that he submitted for a competition in the past, and he would specifically like some feedback on the narrative and ending of the game, as well as the two core game mechanics, which we'll have a look at in a moment. So, my name is Xanthos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and judging other designers' work and giving some feedback on it is something that we routinely do in this industry. So I'm really happy to be able to share my perspective on these things and make it so that other people can benefit from looking at the same document and developing their own thoughts and having a discussion about how each idea could reach its full potential. So before we jump in and start looking at the document that Denislav sent in, let me share with you a little bonus story that really affected how I look at this kind of situation in the past. So while being here in Japan in one of the vocational schools specifically for games, I was actually awarded the opportunity to participate in something called the Inafune Juku. So some of you may know the game Mega Man or Rockman here in Japan and its creator Inafune Keiji. So after he left Capcom, he started his own company, and as part of his activities after that, he does this 6-month or so game design workshop where he invites a few students from various vocational game schools around here in Japan to participate, think about game ideas, create pitch documents, and he and his team give feedback to these ideas. It's a very prestigious thing to be part of. I'm certainly thankful for the opportunity to have met him and hear what he has to say. There was one thing, however, that always kind of stuck in my mind. Whenever we would present an idea to him and or pitch a document, he would always preface his feedback by saying, "Look, this is just my thoughts. I don't know whether you'll implement these thoughts, and if you did implement all the feedback I give to you, this would indeed become a successful game. So this is just my thoughts and my feedback, regardless of the future evolution and the future success of the game." And that always stuck in my mind because I kept thinking, well, this guy is a world famous game creator. He's one of the few out there. If someone as high rank and as high profile as him cannot give you guidance for whether your game will be successful or not, or how to make it successful, what is the real meaning of this feedback then? What is the best way to use it? So that is not to say that his feedback was off or it wasn't good quality. Of course, he always gave amazing feedback. But it just made me think, for my work specifically, when I look at documents like that and I look at ideas, how I want to be thinking about the feedback and what the purpose of this exercise is. So the conclusion I've come to is that basically anybody who makes a pitch document like this or a game design document does so because he wants to see the game made. He wants to actualize the ideas in these pages. So that process typically goes through the concept stage, where you just come up with the idea of the game, and then the design phase, where you describe how all the elements of the game should be for the player to enjoy them, and finally you have to create the game and release it. So no matter what kind of game you're working on, you will most likely go through these stages, and I always work with that assumption in mind. So when I see a document, I always assume that that person wants to make it and release it and have it be playable and enjoyable. And generally, if games are playable and enjoyable, there's a pretty good chance they can be sold as well. So I want to give feedback, and I want to frame my feedback in this way of thinking, not just, some thoughts that I thought about and just some random ideas that came to me while I was reading the document, but with the idea that this is something that wants to be made, it wants to find its way out in the world, and it wants to be commercially successful. Now, that being said, today Denislav specifically asked for feedback on the narrative and the game mechanics, so we won't focus too much on the business side of it and all the other issues that are present here, but we will think about these things with the idea that if he was to take the next steps to make the game, or if this was a game I would have to oversee in the future, these are the next natural steps we would have to take to move the game further and further closer towards its goal of completion. So with that being said, let's jump right in. So what I'll be doing is I'll go through the document once very quickly. I might skip some areas that are not directly related to narrative or game mechanics, and then I'll give my feedback for the requested areas. So the game is called The Darkness of the Sun, and in the beginning of the game you see this text: when the sun falls completely, it rises to its fullest from the opposite side of the lands, burning the world and leaving nothing behind. The end is near, young feline. The wind. Beginning quote of the game, from the game. So, game summary. The Darkness of the Sun will be a role-playing Zelda-styled adventure with many elements like the hidden philosophical charm from games like Journey, with the charm of other IPs like Ratchet and Clank series. It will be a Nintendo Switch exclusive, perfect for small children, with its colorful characters, yet visually deep like IPs like Elden Ring with its epic aesthetic, the huge evil sun looming over the player at all times, watching and growing as the story progresses. So, first point here that I want to quickly mention. So the Darkness of the Sun has a ominous sort of feeling about it, something dark and scary, which is of course fine, but and we'll see other points that relate to this later on in the document. But if the game is meant for young children and it's meant to be colorful and fun and so on, then this title sort of pulls it in the opposite direction. It's not the light and the shadow, and it's not something like dual like this. It's specifically about the darkness of something, namely the sun here. So I think it focuses a little bit too much on the scary side rather than the fun and colorful side. So here my recommendation would be, if since names are so important, if the game is really meant to be more colorful and fun and so on, perhaps change the title to have the sun or some positive image as its main element, and the darkness coming later on, or saying light and shadow, or day and night, and something like that. The sun and the moon, like the power of the sun and the darkness of the moon, something like that. Something to soften a bit the dark and negative meaning here, which is not wrong. It's just my experience that when working with younger audiences and you want to appeal to the positive side of the game, this kind of title generally works better for you. But let's move on. It will feature standard controls known to fans of action-adventure games, but will also include a new type of control. With the announcement of the Switch 2, the right Joy-Con will be able to be used like a mouse. In the Darkness of the Sun, this feature will be used to control the camera. So I'm not entirely sure how this will play out. Maybe one hand will be using the controller for its buttons mainly, while the other will be against a table to be controlling the camera specifically. This is a feature where I would like a little bit more of an explanation to get a better image. So this document is already somewhat of a mixed concept document and early game design document, which is completely fine, of course. But generally splitting the two and saying, you know, this document just talks about the concept and this document just talks about the game design and all the nitty-gritty features is a better approach to have different conversations, right? Without mixing the two. But of course, since this is an early stage, this is completely fine. Of course, the division can come later on. So let's go to the description of the main character and story. In the land named Unity, a humanoid civilization with magical properties and powers lives in a free and peaceful world. The moon and the sun have arranged a deal lasting infinity, but someone has destroyed the contract, and now the world will burn in darkness. Nobody knows how the contract was destroyed, but what they do know is that this has torn the natural balance apart. The sun, glowing ever so dangerously, has possessed the animals of Unity, mutating them and turning them sentient and evil through its strong natural light. The moon has lost its liveliness and has put every person asleep, never being able to wake up, meaning that in days all shall perish. A ginger cat named Mimi from a caring person has also gained sentience and mutated, but hasn't lost touch with reality like other animals. She embarks on a journey guided by the wind. In the end, she will decide if she will become the evil god of the sun, ruling over all sentient animals and leaving the people to die, or wake them up and restore the balance once more, while sacrificing herself to create a new contract that can't be destroyed. After the ending credits, you get a cutscene where you learn that the original contract was broken by real future humans from Earth that have turned evil and that wanted to destroy the world of Unity after finding it in space. Okay, let's take a let's take a pause here. Clearly, this is a very story-heavy game, and this is a great thing when you're designing a game that's meant to reward the player through the story. So the story of a game can serve multiple roles, sometimes at the same time too. So using it in this case to say that, look, the story of this game is actually quite complicated, and of course you cannot reveal it all in one go. So we'll make it so that the player slowly discovers the story, and the more he discovers the story, the more he realizes that this goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the, you know, underpinnings and background of what happened before to lead us to this point. Of course, the character being a cat that just mutated naturally puts us in a state where we have very little information about the world, so we will naturally be discovering together with the main character what happened and what can be done to save this world. I think there is a lot of questions that arise when we're looking at this story. So for example, why was there a contract between the sun and the moon to begin with, and why humans from Earth that turned evil wanted to destroy the world of Unity? What was the motivation in that, and why was the world in space? So does the world of Unity occupy the same universe as real normal humans, or what's the connection there? Again, this is not to say that these elements are wrong, but these are likely points that will need to be specified later on. The reason why I'm highlighting this is twofold. One, if this game is meant for young children, this is already kind of complicated. So showing the motivations of humans to destroy the world, and that humans are supposed to coexist in this fantasy-like world with the creatures of this world, is going to be a key element, especially if the game has a cartoon-like aesthetic. So that needs to be definitely handled with care. And also displaying the motivations of humans to destroy the world and break the contract in the first place is a valid point if you want the game to reach an audience beyond children, right? So I think that one of the things that many games and many movies do often to confuse us is introduce story elements but not really say why things happen, or just leave things that are unexplained. So an unexplained part in a story is basically wasted because it creates a problem without a solution. So the viewer gets invested into understanding the situation and trying to see how it could be resolved, but it never gives the satisfaction of the solution or the conclusion to that particular story thread. So this is definitely something to complete when taking the next steps of fleshing out this story, I think. And now we have some very good images, especially at this early stage from Denislav. It's really amazing to have a game designer who can also draw. It's pretty rare in the industry, and since game design and game ideas happen in someone's mind, it's often very difficult to convey them to other people with images that are easy to find and capture the essence of the game idea. So being able to do this, to have images of the characters like that, really helps in the game design process. So let's move forward to the game mechanics, and let's start with game mechanic 1. A creative way to guide where the player will need to go, specifically the main quest. The wind is the guiding force for the player and an invisible character in itself. It will be the wind in the world, literally, which will sometimes whisper in the ears of the player and guide him or her by going in the direction of the main path quest line. It will be shown in the sky with animated thin white lines. When leaves blow off trees, they will blow in the direction of the main quest. There will be rare places where there will not be a wind, meaning that the player will be lost and will need to improvise. The player will be able to listen to the wind, which will happen after holding a button on the controller, and he or she will hear a word or two which will act as a riddle, like hearing the words run away or go left. Okay, let's unpack this. So having the wind guide the player as these white lines that are supposed to sort of create a visual cue for the wind is, I think, a good idea. It's something that I've seen before in where was it? Monster Hunter Wild, and I guess Monster Hunter's After, like that. Oh no, Monster Hunter World had a similar system with the fireflies that sort of fly close to the player and are supposed to lead you closer to the monster you're supposed to hunt. That system definitely worked in that game, and it makes it very easy and intuitive to see where you should go. And listening to the wind to be able to get these cues sounds like a riddle system rather than a guidance system. So this is a caution point that I think should be fleshed out a little bit more. So if the instructions are very clear, then that should be okay for guidance. But running away or going left sometimes can be a bit ambiguous. So run away just a few meters, or like run away all the way back to, I don't know, the previous area. It can be a little bit ambiguous. Also, things like go left make sense when you're thinking about the overall design of the level, but players being players will want to do with the camera whatever they want to do with the camera at any given point. So left becomes a relative term. So here I think some more definition needs to be made between whether this will be an audio cue system, in which case the hints must be much more clear, or it should be a riddle system that says, look for the blue light or something, so the player starts looking for blue things, in which case it becomes a riddle system. Also, you mentioned that there will be areas without a wind, and the player will be lost and will need to improvise. That sounds like a fun element, but there must be, even in this case, a clear direction about what the player should do. So perhaps there is no wind to guide the player for the direction he should go towards, but there should be something else guiding him at all points. So as players, when we're playing a game and we don't know what to do, we don't know what the game wants us to do, it's an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Even back in the day when there was side-scroller games and literally all you could do was progress to the right side of the screen, there was still several games that felt the need to specifically tell the player, go right or continue right or something like that. Even though that is literally the only direction the player could ever move towards, there would still be other players or little things to explore in that specific screen, where the player would sort of lose that rhythm of continuously going to the right and would stay in the same screen and think, well, if the game is letting me be here, perhaps there is something to do here still. And the player would lose a lot of time there, and he would keep searching for things and get disappointed and go all the way to the left of the screen and see there's nothing there and get confused and perhaps close the game down. So that is to say that this absence of wind sections are definitely interesting, but they will need a different sort of very, very clear indication of what the players should be doing. And then it could be a light or a constant direction of the screen, like climb upwards or, find your way through the tunnels, and there's only like 3 choices, for example, so the player knows that no matter what he does, he needs to pick one of those and explore it to the end. Some other indication is necessary to guide the player through this. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's a good system. So with that, let's go to the second mechanic, how combat will work. So when hitting an opponent with Y, every hit you land will heal lost hit points, health points rather, and add bonus hit points and add haste points as a meter under your HP. Each hit you miss lowers your haste, making you more vulnerable to damage. As the meter lowers, you can get one-shot killed by almost any enemy. Staying out of combat heals the haste meter. The goal is to hit fast to heal, and yet be careful not to miss, as the haste meter will drop and you will be very easily killed. So this is a very important mechanic, even though it's described very briefly in the document. If I understand it correctly, the point of this mechanic is to reward accuracy with the strikes of the player. Sorry, my throat was dying. So the system rewards you for being accurate, and it punishes you for missing your strikes. But you have the opportunity to get out of combat and regenerate your haste meter. So here I think the use of the word haste might be a little bit confusing. When I first read this mechanic, I thought that by hitting and you're keeping your haste meter high or making it as high as possible, then you can hit faster, that the speed of your strikes becomes faster. But it seems that, unless I missed it somewhere, the speed of your strikes remains the same, but if the meter is high, you regenerate health. But if the meter is low, then you take more damage. So this is a mechanic that is amplifying both sides of the skill, right? If your skill is high with these attacks, then you not only you deal damage and you're effective in combat, but you also get healed. So two good things happening there. But if you miss, then you don't get healing and essentially the enemy gets a multiplier on their damage or something like that. So it's possible for literally any enemy to one-shoot you if the haste meter is low enough. So I suppose the strategy to use this for the player would be go in, start attacking the enemy. If it goes well, you hit the enemy a lot and you don't really care if you get hit back because you keep healing with every hit you land. But if you go in and you start missing and you take more and more damage from the enemy, then that's when you want to pull out and get out of combat and regenerate your haste meter and try again. Of course, by the time you realize that you are not doing well in this fight, you will have already lost quite a bit of hit points, which I think will put the player in a difficult situation. So even if you get out of combat and you regenerate your haste meter, then your best choice is to repeat the same action, so try to hit the enemy again, but this time you will have less hit points than you had during the previous attempt. Overall, I think this is quite punishing, and especially given the nature of the game to be suited for small children, I think this is quite punishing. Something I would consider here is, together with regenerating the haste meter, perhaps regenerating your hit points at least up to a certain level to make the game more approachable. So even modern games that are directed towards adults have this mechanic where if you're out of combat, you either use your med kits and whatever to regenerate health, and some of them flat out regenerate your health. If you're out of combat, you just heal to full. So you can try again and again as many times as you need. If you just get out of combat and go hide behind a box or something. So my feedback for this is it's a bit too strict, a bit too punishing in its current state. So the 2 points I have for this is either perhaps use a different word for this haste part, haste meter. Maybe call it like an excellence meter or regeneration power or something to connect the meaning of regenerating hit points with the function of this meter. So when somebody reads the name, or when the game says this is your regeneration meter or something, the player understands that, okay, this shows how much I heal. When I see haste points, I understand speed or quickness or something. So I would associate that with faster attack speed. And again, this is just my impression of it, but this just highlights the importance of the words we choose in game design and how we can save ourselves the work of educating the player about all these different things by simply choosing better words and better visual cues to indicate the function of all these mechanics. So that is point 1. Point 2 is about the negative side of this mechanic. So in the case where you miss a lot and you drop your defense multiplier, or the enemy or basically increase how much damage the enemies do, that is quite punishing. So that may be so, but I'm not opposed to the idea in general. So something to counteract this and prevent the player from dying too easily would be probably a good idea in this case. So something like an early warning that's, look, you're really vulnerable right now and you should pull out of combat before you lose health to the enemy might be a good way to counter this. Or, as I said before, when you're out of combat, regenerate your health at least up to the midpoint, or 60% or 70% or something. Might also be a good way to counter this. Alternatively, a way to keep the system as it is here and switch from a reward and punishment system to a pure reward system would be if you manage to connect consecutive hits, then not only you regenerate, but also your attack speed goes up. So the player is allowed to experience this high of doing well and regenerating hit points and going like a cat, attacking quickly and feeling good for his good performance. And then when he doesn't manage to do that, he sort of fumbles and he delays and the speed of his attacks is slow, which is something many players will pick up naturally and will know the difference in emotional reward in both cases. So I think you can convey the meaning you want through that sort of system as well, if that is a direction you want to follow. Otherwise, yeah, adjusting the words and adjusting a little bit the out of combat experience will also, I think, have a good effect for this game. Okay, let's move on. So, game elements, objects, enemies, weapons, and so on. Claws of Grace, the main weapon of the game, will allow for quick attacks that heal and increase your haste on hit. This is, I suppose, the same weapon we're using up to now. And that is to say, this is, I guess, the only weapon for now in the game. So this is identical to the mechanics we saw before. I don't know if other weapons are supposed to be present in the game. So for now, I assume that this is the only one. 2. Boots of improved speed and haste. When you find this item, you have gained infinite sprint and the ability to dodge hits with the A button. Okay, sounds good. Sounds like this will give the player a way to traverse the world faster and also a different way to handle combat with the ability to dodge. I suppose that without this, the player has to sort of move the analog stick away from the monster and get away from the monster in that way, but having the dodge will manage to do that faster, perhaps at the cost of haste. Perhaps. Again, I would like to see a little bit more of a refinement on the dodge mechanics, but overall this makes sense. I don't see an issue with this. Often seen enemies, elephant warriors, cheetah knights. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna skip over these things because they all sound good. I think they all make sense. So yeah, enemies along this direction definitely fit the theme of the game, and their particular mechanics look interesting too. Often seen objects, items, the camera. You get the camera early on, you can use it to take photos and film short videos in the game. Sure, sounds good. If it has huge range, meaning it can be used to see far in the distance for secrets and to plan out routes for attack and exploration. Yes, I think this is good. One of the big problems that large environments have is that you often don't know which direction is worth going towards, and you often miss things that were just outside of you. So perhaps this will give you a way to gain information about what rewards can be had if you head out in a certain direction. So yeah, I think this is a good idea. Switches, you will need to use them to open certain doors that block your progress in the game world. Again, very standard mechanic. I don't see anything wrong with this. Example of a zone in the game. The starting area. The starting tutorial and the ending zone will be the same, except they will be mirrored and will have different color schemes. The first will have warmer colors and the later will have a darker color palette. Again, this I think is completely fine. This sort of change signifies to the player that they're getting closer and closer to the dark, scary end goal. So this type of darkness I think is completely fine. The point I made about the title is just for the initial reaction of someone when they're picking up the game box and they're reading the title or something. So this by itself I think is completely fine. This zone will feature 2 enemy towers and a house, environment storytelling. There will be a secret hidden near each. Okay, that sounds good. Here you can see a top-down idea art of the first zone. Yeah, this looks like an okay layout. I think you will want a little bit more for here, but since this is just a very beginning starting area, perhaps it's a good idea to flesh it out a bit more. I'd say for now this is fine. To be able to judge this kind of early sketch, it's also good to pair it with something like a test, right? So say something like, in this area, the goal of the area is to teach the player 1, 2, 3 mechanics, or to reveal to the player 1, 2, 3 story elements. So story element 1 is revealed here, story element 2 is revealed here, story 3 here. If you have this information about the goal of a certain area, then it's very easy to judge its layout. Otherwise, basically anything goes, since this could be used for literally anything. So this is, of course, this is very good. This is already more fleshed out than I've seen in many other examples. It's just something to guide your way forward as you're building and refining the layout of each area. And finally, we come to the example of winning and losing the game. You win by battling enemies, dodging and carefully hitting your opponents as to not lose haste. Enemies attack with different speeds and move differently, meaning that players will need to predict attacks and enemy movement patterns. When you hit an opponent, they react differently. Some become more aggressive, some more defensive, some even run when their hit points is low. Some will pretend to surrender and then attack you as you turn your back. Ooh, spicy. Again, so this is a clever mechanic. This is something that definitely makes sense in certain scenarios. It's a change on the standard mechanics that you see in open world action games. When we're thinking about the game being for children, this kind of punishing mechanic is, again, a little bit too punishing, I think, since games for children are generally very, very forgiving. So I would say either make this very, very limited in the game, so it only happens once or twice throughout the entire game, or make it forgiving enough to make sure that the player can recover when this happens and the enemy basically pretends to surrender and attacks you in the back. If this kills you, it will feel not good the first time, which I suppose is understandable because you learn the lesson like that. If it happens again after the first time and basically there's nothing you can do to prevent it, yeah, this will feel pretty bad for the player. I think it's an interesting mechanic, just be very, very careful for its use here. Enemies will drop shards of knowledge, which will unlock information about the world's lore at a near knowledge shrine. They act as experience points, but devoted to the story and not to a player level. The player won't have a level. So I suppose the more of these experience points you get, the more you unlock world story bits. As you win, you get better at finding enemies and knowing the lore of the world. There are cutscenes after each zone. There are 10 zones in the game with a boss after the 2nd, 4th, 6th, 8th and 10th zone. How you lose, and you will. You have a health meter, and if it drops to 0, you lose and respawn where the game last autosaved, which is often about 15 seconds before the enemy encounter. The game saves in areas near enemies and after picking up things, items and collectibles. When dying, you will see the words, "and the world was lost," on the screen in a big blue font. Okay, let's stop here. There is more information here about DLC and the speedrun mode and how to handle bugs and so on. This is a really cool picture and I want you guys to see it. But we will not cover that since we have still to address one more point for feedback, and that is the ending of the game. So, and I guess I should talk a little bit more about the narrative as well. So, let's start with the narrative. First of all, you're supposed to be this cat who has mutated to be a humanoid, and you fight these other mutated animals that seem to be going crazy from all this process. Overall, I think that this makes sense in this given world. I don't think there's any issue with this narrative. I think it fits the cuteness and the light and bright feeling of the world. For the progression towards the ending, basically you have two choices. Either you save the world but sacrifice yourself, or you don't save the world and you become the new evil god. Either way, it sounds like humans that are sleeping will die anyway, since I think it is assumed that with nobody to wake them up, they will just die of thirst or hunger or something. So when you become the evil god, well, you being evil and everything, I suppose you won't stop them. It's pretty dark. Okay, so perhaps I'm misunderstanding something, but overall, I don't mind the system. Perhaps it needs to be a bit smoothened out to be more suitable for children. But what I do like about it is that when you finish the game, there is no, deep and complex and thoughtful. You have to worry about your choices, and some of the choices are good and some are bad, and they have real world impact and all that. So for a game for children, perhaps this is too confusing. Not to say that this should never be done, but we're talking about this particular context. Something good about this system is that you finish the game and you do one of the two endings, and of course you don't have access to the other one. So because this game requires quite a bit of skill to be able to handle the haste meter properly and dodge all the attacks and make your other attacks connect and so on, when you finish the game, I have the suspicion that you will feel pretty good about the skill you have accumulated with the cat claws weapon. And that will probably make you want to play the game one more time now that you know how everything works, both to enjoy combat as an expert now and to see the other ending. So seeing the other ending is basically just an excuse to replay the game, perhaps do some of the speedrun you mentioned, and enjoy the combat system now that you know what everything is about. And also redo the tutorials and go through the same trials, and perhaps relearn some of the tricks that the tutorials wanted you to learn, but perhaps you forgot over the first run of the game. So that I think is good stuff. And we talked about narrative, and we talked about the mechanics as well. So I think that covers most of the points Denislav wanted me to have a look at. What we haven't covered is all the development stuff and all the business side of the stuff for this game, which is completely okay for now, since he mentioned that this is what he wanted to cover in this session. Going forward, just a little point about Nintendo. From my experience, is that working with Nintendo, if you really want to release this as a Switch exclusive in the future, is one of the more lengthy processes out there, especially when it comes to developing for consoles. Typically, Nintendo uses a specialized version of the Unity engine for many games. Again, this is not the only choice, but it just so happens typically. And there are just many steps to contacting them and finding someone to talk to about this game, getting them on board, getting them to be interested, and then going through the development process and finally releasing it for their platform. And of course, there's a hefty chunk of the profits that Nintendo takes to be able to feature your game on their lineup. But perhaps these are all points to discuss for another day. So that's it. Thank you for joining the first session of the meditation room. I hope this was helpful. If you have a game idea that you think would like to hear some feedback about, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to my thoughts about this, and I hope it's an indication for a way forward for Denislav to take his game closer and closer to his goal of completion. Anyway, as always, keep enjoying this kind of stuff and have fun.